Hi, I am your Professor Mark. Welcome to this journey into public thinking and strategy. Today, we're diving into a critical topic within public policy: policy problems, framing, and diagnosis. This session is part of our course, Introduction to Public Policy Analysis and Strategy. We'll explore how public problems are identified, how narratives shape responses, and why understanding complexity is essential for effective policy action. Let's begin. Introduction to Public Policy Analysis and Strategy. Policy analysis starts with problem identification, but what constitutes a problem is not always obvious. In this session, we'll look at the political, institutional, and analytical dimensions of diagnosing public problems. Framing issues properly is not just a first step, it defines the entire path forward. We'll also examine analytical tools that help us unpack complexity and move toward more strategic interventions. What constitutes a public problem? Public problems are not merely private complaints made louder. They are issues that affect collective welfare and justify state intervention. They usually arise when markets fail, resources are misallocated, or basic needs are unmet. Think of climate change, food insecurity, or healthcare access. These are systemic, affect broad populations, and demand coordinated responses. Understanding the scale and collective impact is the first key step. Sources and signals of public issues problems come into view through data, events, and discourse. Sometimes it's media coverage, sometimes it's a crisis like a pandemic, or even sustained statistical trends like rising inequality. Indicators and feedback loops highlight pressure points, but problems don't just emerge, they are constructed and recognized socially. This makes it vital to understand why certain issues rise to prominence while others remain invisible. Constructing problem trees. One of the most effective tools in problem diagnosis is the problem tree. It visually maps the central issue, its root causes below, and its effects above. This helps separate symptoms from structural drivers. For example, if youth unemployment is the central problem, the tree might trace causes like low education quality or economic stagnation. It gives us a structured lens to unpack complexity. From symptoms to root causes, policy fails when we treat symptoms as causes. Diagnosing root causes, whether they're institutional, behavioral, or economic, is essential for long-term success. This means going beyond surface-level analysis. For example, a failing education system might be traced back to fiscal constraints, not just poor teachers. The key is depth and causality, not just immediacy. Mapping stakeholder interests. Public policy isn't made in a vacuum. It's contested by stakeholders. These range from civil society and businesses to governments and citizens. Mapping out who benefits, who loses, and who influences helps clarify hidden dynamics. Recognizing power imbalances, who speaks loudly and who remains unheard, is part of responsible diagnosis. Stakeholder analysis also informs negotiation and coalition building. Recognizing bias and subjectivity. Everyone sees problems through a subjective lens. Biases, whether ideological or cognitive, shape how stakeholders define issues. Confirmation bias or anchoring can distort even the most data-driven conversations. A teacher union might frame school reform differently than a tech startup. Effective policy design must account for this diversity of views without letting any one narrative dominate unfairly. The three streams explained, Kingdon model. Kingdon's model explains how problems, solutions, and political will must align for change to occur. The problem stream includes rising concerns or indicators. The policy stream includes proposed solutions, and the politics stream refers to the broader climate: elections, coalitions, public mood. A policy window opens when all three align. Timing, as you'll see, is everything. Leveraging policy windows effectively. Policy entrepreneurs are those who watch for such windows and act fast. They must be ready with clear, feasible proposals before the window closes. This is why preparation matters as much as persuasion. Many well-crafted solutions fail simply because they arrive too early or too late. Seizing the moment requires strategy and agility. The power of framing. Framing is not just semantics, it defines meaning. How you frame an issue shapes public understanding and political feasibility. Labeling an issue as a crisis rather than a trend can invoke urgency. Framing affects perceptions of causality, blame, and responsibility. This is why issue framing is a political act, not just a rhetorical one. Competing narratives and media-influenced narratives compete. An environmental issue might be framed as a climate crisis by activists or as job-killing regulation by industry. Media serve as amplifiers for these competing frames. They influence what gets attention and how it's understood. Strategic framing through language, statistics, and symbolism is key in shaping agenda outcomes. Defining wicked problems. Wicked problems are hard to define, harder to solve. They have no clear boundaries, no final solutions, and multiple interlinked causes. Climate change, homelessness, and social inequality fall into this category. Attempts to fix them often create new problems. Recognizing a problem's wickedness changes how we respond. It encourages flexibility over finality. Dealing with complexity and uncertainty, policy systems are non-linear and unpredictable. Solutions can backfire. That's why adaptive governance, trial, feedback, and iteration is so important. Policymakers must tolerate ambiguity and avoid overconfidence. Complexity doesn't mean paralysis, it means evolving with the problem. Elite versus pluralist models. Who sets the policy agenda? Elite theories argue it's powerful insiders. Pluralist theories say it's a competition among groups. Both have truth. Elites often dominate, but advocacy can shift priorities. Knowing the forces behind agenda setting helps analysts predict what gets done and what doesn't. Think tanks and advocacy coalitions. Think tanks and coalitions act as long-term shapers of policy discourse. They influence what counts as legitimate knowledge and what issues deserve attention. Through sustained campaigns, they can shift policy paradigms even when short-term wins are absent. Their power lies in persistence and framing. Quantifying problems, indicators help clarify problems. Numbers like literacy rates, pollution levels, or GDP growth translate abstract concerns into measurable facts. Benchmarks help assess progress and compare policies. They also support transparency and accountability in governance. Pitfalls in benchmark selection. But metrics can mislead. Oversimplification reduces nuance. Poorly chosen benchmarks can create perverse incentives, like teaching to the test in education. What we measure matters, because what gets measured gets managed. Analysts must be critical of data sources and cautious of over-reliance. Political, legal, and bureaucratic barriers. Good policy can be blocked by bad systems. Institutional constraints like legal limits or bureaucratic inertia impede reform. Understanding these barriers helps in designing implementable and realistic policies. Politics, not just logic, governs policy success. Path dependence and institutional lock-in history haunts policy. Past decisions shape today's options. Once a program is established, reversing it is hard due to sunk costs and established interests. Institutions resist change unless change is built into their evolution. This is why reform often happens incrementally, not suddenly. Types and causes of failures. Policy can fail at multiple stages: design, implementation, or politics. Sometimes it's bad execution, sometimes flawed ideas, sometimes it's corruption or misaligned incentives. Categorizing failure helps us fix the right things. Not every failure is the same. Learning from failure should be feedback, not finality. Systematic reviews and adaptive management help recover and improve. Openness to learning, especially politically, is key. Acknowledging mistakes builds trust and resilience. That's how systems evolve. Conclusion: synthesizing insights. To wrap up, framing defines the problem, analysis reveals causes, and diagnosis shapes solutions. We've seen how tools like policy windows, problem trees, and stakeholder maps support rigorous strategy, but the world remains uncertain. Our best response is iterative, inclusive, and thoughtful policy work.